I'd like to begin by marking the passing earlier this week of my good friend and fellow Caxtonian Harry Stern, the much beloved Chicago book and map dealer, universally known as a gentleman of the first degree. Harry was my first mentor in the rare book world. He was a wonderful, warm character who will be much missed. He was 90 years old. During the pandemic, many of us have been enjoying the plethora, the efflorescence of online events about the book arts. Our own local artists' book house in Chicagoland, led by Audrey Niffenegger, who's with us tonight, has gone virtual, just as the annual New Jersey Book Arts Symposium, which I attended last week and the week before, and many others. These have been stimulating and fun and have really served as a testimony to the vigor of this field. My colleagues this evening and I have noticed that these presentations have tended to focus on the artists themselves and on private collectors. So for this Caxton Club program, we decided to do something a little different, to come at the subject from the point of view of the institutional collector, that is, from the point of view of the curator. We wanted to provide you with some insight on what's going on in our minds when you're sitting across the table from us at a book fair or in our reading rooms. And when I used the word you, then I was speaking to the book artists in the group. So instead of talking about what we are collecting, we want to focus on why we acquire what we do and what we do with it. Instead of attempting yet another definition of the artist's book or expounding upon the theory, we want to describe the nuts and bolts of the various aspects of institutional collecting, its constraints, its considerations, and its rationale, much of which, you won't be surprised to learn, is fixed and ultimately beyond our control. In this regard, there are two features of this type of collecting I would highlight. The first has to do with the distinction between artists' books and the other rare books that we curators acquire. Much of the old stuff comes to us with its value and importance already determined, already proven by generations or even centuries of use. It's known, readily contextualized within a matrix of similar material, and easy to understand and interpret. Artists' books, on the other hand, often come to us directly from the hand of the maker, circumventing that traditional path of maker to user to curator. And this puts a tremendous responsibility, I guess you'd say, or weight, solely on the knowledge and discernment of the curator. That's to say that this object comes with no historical judgment, no prejudice, no baggage attached to it, as older materials do, and so is often more difficult for us to contextualize and comprehend. Second, and this is a very positive thing, is the factor of the personal relationship that we have with you, book artists. I can't ask Emily Dickinson about her creative process or about the subtle meanings of some of her passages, but I can ask Jen Bervin what was behind certain physical features of her wonderful Dickinson Composites series of 2004. I can and have had lunch with Rick Myers, whom you'll hear about more in a second, and gleaned much and learned much from both of them. This rapport, or the potentiality of rapport, is, I think, one of the most potent elements of the trade in artists' books. Both curators and artists should recognize this and nurture it. And there are many other interesting aspects of the curator's role that we will now hear about from our distinguished, internationally known, and highly experienced panel. We've pre-recorded the presentations just to minimize the chances of technical screw-up, but let me introduce them to you now in order of their appearance. Anne Evenhaugen has been at the Smithsonian for 9 years now in several positions, most recently as the head librarian for the Smithsonian American Art and Portrait Gallery Library and the Smithsonian Library's Art Department, where she manages the day-to-day operations of a large research library of over 180,000 volumes, including rare and unique books and a large ephemera collection. She also supervises staff and special projects across the 5 art libraries at the Smithsonian Institution, so a very wide-ranging job. With her particular interest in artists' books, Anne was central in the Smithsonian's effort to make the institution's large collection of this material more searchable online. She's also worked for a variety of arts organizations, including the Moderna Museet and the Fotografiska Museum in Stockholm, as well as the American Alliance of Museums and the National Gallery of Art in Washington. She holds degrees in art history, library science, and art curation from Mary Washington College, the University of Maryland, and Stockholm University in Sweden, where she curated her first large show on artist books, which was called Reading the Object at the Moderna Museet in 2011. She is the co-author of a chapter on artist books in the forthcoming book, The New Art Museum Library, which is to be published in the spring of 2021. Next up will be Ruth Rogers, the curator of special collections at Wellesley College, who administers a collection of over 40,000 items, including rare books, medieval and Renaissance manuscripts, modern fine press books, and contemporary artist books, of course. As a scholar, Ruth specializes in the evolution of the book as material culture, visual communication, and artistic form. A major aspect of her duties at Wellesley is the preparation of hands-on lectures, and these are really hands-on lectures, for visiting classes across the curriculum, which she does in consultation with faculty, with teaching faculty, but as a peer. She also teaches her own intensive hands-on seminar, The History of the Book from Manuscript to Print. She's the co-founder of the college's Book Studies program, a pioneering cross-disciplinary approach to past as well as future forms of textual communication. Among the many exhibitions that she's curated are Beyond Words at Sewanee University, Reading the Senses at Lesley University College of Art and Design, Seductive Alchemy at Texas Women's University. In her public speaking and writing, her focus is on the critical reading and interpretation of international, and I stress that word, international contemporary artist books as a resource in academic libraries. Ruth is a frequent juror for exhibitions and awards in book arts and is currently an invited contributor to the forthcoming Materialia Lumina exhibition catalog sponsored by the Codex Foundation, which will come out next year. And then we'll hear from our fellow Caxtonian, Jill Gage, who joined the staff of the Newberry in 2004 and since 2016 has served as the custodian of the John M. Wing Foundation on the History of Printing, as well as bibliographer for British literature and history. She received her PhD in English literature, that is, from the University of London in 2015. She holds a BA and MA in English literature from the University of Illinois at Chicago and an MS in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. At the Newberry, Jill curated the fabulous 2016 exhibition, Creating Shakespeare, which I know that many of you saw and which was just knocked my socks off. And her new exhibition, A Show of Hands, 500 Years of the Art and Technology of Handwriting, is scheduled to open on December 18th. So those are our distinguished panelists.
Thank you. I'm excited to share a little bit about our artist books at the Smithsonian Institution. I realize that in talking about institutional collecting at the Smithsonian, I'm talking about a massive, amorphous octopus with our 19 research centers, 21 libraries, and the largest museum complex in the world, which is kind of an impossible task. So I'd like to give a basic overview of how artist books fit into the whole institution, but focus more on what I know best, which is the collecting of artist books in my part of the octopus, the Smithsonian Libraries. Whether their core mission relates to history, culture, or science, every museum and research unit at the Smithsonian also collects art. From examples of teeny tiny stamp art at the National Postal Museum, to the giant murals of stars and planets on the walls of the National Air and Space Museum, to those you usually think of, art at the National Portrait Gallery or the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. Art infuses all parts of the Smithsonian Institution, which means we have the wonderful ability to use art in so many different ways and to look at art through many different lenses. Some of these museums also collect artist books, but usually as an extension of practice for an artist they collect in other forms. For example, the American Art Museum has a large collection of Joseph Cornell shadow boxes and his works on paper. And they also have his artist book, Maria, seen here, which he published himself in an edition of 100, using his typical collage elements. Another work here is by Ghanaian artist Atakwami, which is just one of several examples of his artwork in the collection of the National Museum of African Art. It is an artist book honoring his mother and using the story of Anansi, the spider. You can see that the binding resembles a spider itself. There are other amazing representative examples in our museums, but they number maybe a few dozen, because for the most part, the museums of the Smithsonian have not typically collected deeply in artist books, which is where the Smithsonian Libraries come in. I see the libraries as the true home for artist books at the Smithsonian. And with our sisters at the National Gallery of Art and the Library of Congress, we are one of the 3 largest federal repositories collecting these on behalf of the American people. You're welcome. There are 21 libraries in all fields of the Smithsonian and 5 branches that collect artist books specifically. Between these great libraries, we have a growing collection of artworks in book form, numbering well over 1,000. In its basic form, for us, artist books are works of art, like paintings or sculptures, but they use the elements of the book as inspiration. We collect conceptual and traditional examples, artworks created on a Xerox machine in unlimited runs, and also unique works undertaken with extreme care and attention to detail. And it might be important to point out what we do not collect. We generally do not collect examples of livre d'artiste or fine press as artist books, though many of these do live in our special collections alongside our rare books. The same is the case for artist illustrated books. They come into the collection, but not as artist books. We also don't actively collect zines, though many other museums and libraries do. And lastly, we aim for representation. In my case, in telling the American story through art, but we can't be completist. By representation, I mean interesting examples of paper or experiments with type and binding or diverse subject matter, if there is subject matter, and a range of voices. But while I would love to boast that we have the largest collection, we just don't have the budget or the space. So we have to be careful in purchasing and even in accepting donations. Each branch of the Smithsonian Libraries has a specific focus, which correlates to their artist books collection. So the Library of the Cooper Hewitt collects examples with top-notch design elements, like paper engineering and pop-ups, like this magnificent Julie Chen. The African Art Library focuses on artist books that are by African artists or are about Africa. The Hirshhorn Library is strong in examples by artists also featured in the museum's modern and contemporary art collection, as in this Sol LeWitt example. And the Dibner Library maintains a small collection that was almost completely commissioned for the library. All works by leading book artists inspired by the historic Heralds of Science texts in the Dibner Rare Book Collection. The branch library that I manage and collect for, the American Art and Portrait Gallery, is a hybrid of art and history, supporting the curatorial work of 3 robust units in our deep collection of research material on American art, portraiture, and biography. Our artist book collection today also reflects those areas. Like many libraries, it has grown in spurts, and as the librarian has been lucky enough to find precious funds, or come across something truly magical, or has been the recipient of a generous donation of a work by an artist or a collector. Many of us grow these collections through attending book fairs, finding new things online via dealers, presses, or social media, or by welcoming artists themselves to our libraries to show off their work. So what do the Smithsonian libraries do with their artist books? Librarians use artist books to support research. We enhance exhibitions, presentations to public, school, or donor groups, and we use them for outreach in our events and our social media presence. Artist books are often included in museum exhibitions, and the libraries have curated several shows, such as the Dibner's 1996 exhibition, Science and the Artist Book, at the National Museum of American History, which explored how science can serve as a springboard for artistic creation. More recently, the National Museum of African Art hosted Artist Books of Africa in 2016. Since artist books are not normally associated with African art, this exhibition was a first for the Smithsonian to introduce the genre and survey its African manifestations. In addition, this exhibition website has a great video that you can view from home. It is linked in our website that I'll share at the end. We also collect to support research at the institution. For example, at the Hirshhorn Library, acquiring a work by an artist who is in the museum's collection creates strength through depth, which is something core to the very founding of their collection by Joseph Hirshhorn, who was known for going into an art gallery and buying up an artist's entire show just so he had it all. It allows a full picture of an artist's oeuvre, and bonus, when an artist's work enters the Smithsonian libraries, unlike at the museums, we allow people to touch them. But artist books also meet curatorial trends, and they distinguish the Smithsonian Library's collection from many other libraries in the modern and contemporary art field. Burgeoning research is also incredibly important to the Smithsonian, such that we support hundreds of fellows every year across the institution. Fellows in the libraries and art museums often consult artist books in their research. In particular, the Fluxus and conceptual works of the 1960s and 70s. And just last year, we hosted a PhD candidate in her study on contemporary poetry and artist books. And in my time pulling her box after box of our artist books, she actually inspired me to acquire a work she had written about, as it was such a lovely fit for our collection at the American Art and Portrait Gallery. You can see it here, the homage to Allen Ginsberg. In addition to these reasons to growing and maintaining our artist books collections, they are also just such an interesting subject to engage with, and our librarians love working with them, showing them off, and blogging about them. I hope I've been able to convey the wide range of artist books we have, and how we continue to build on the collection through acquisition, research, and dissemination. Anyone can learn more about artist books in our collections on the Smithsonian Library's website. And when we've kicked COVID-19 and can be open again, you can make an appointment to come see them in person. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ruth Rogers, and I'm curator of special collections at Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. I would like to thank the members of the Caxton Club for hosting this event, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion with my co-panelists and the audience when it's over. In setting out to explain my collecting strategy for acquiring artist books for Wellesley College, I realized that it would be easier to identify what I do not acquire, which is a much narrower universe. So let me just clarify that I reserve the right to modify, contradict, or outright ignore these guidelines if a book comes along that just needs to be part of the collection. I prefer to think of this as being open to what may arise in the future, rather than adhering to rigid standards that have to be challenged. My primary goal in acquiring artist books for liberal arts collections such as this one has always been to promote them not just as works of art, but as vehicles for human expression, the result of individual or collaborative creative endeavor. In an academic library, this means working with faculty and other audiences to integrate them with the historical collections of rare books and manuscripts, to remind the viewer that they're not separate from earlier forms of the book, but relatives in a long evolutionary line. What all of their creators have in common is the impulse to communicate, whether in words, images, or through material presence. The challenge then for any curator is to discern from the vast range of possibilities and to imagine how their choices will become part of teaching and learning at their institution. The first category that comes to mind when you work in a rare book collection is content that builds on that collection. So the first slide I will show you is the Encyclopédie, published in the middle of the 18th century and edited by Denis Diderot. I have compared this or put this in context with Ken Botnick's The Diderot Project, published in 2015. Botnick uses the themes of Diderot's work to examine the relationship between craft and design, cognition and memory. Every astounding page spread is a discovery. It is not a book about the Encyclopédie, it is a conversation across 2.5 centuries, meeting on the landscape of the page. And this book won the MCBA award in 2015. The next I'll show you is Galileo's Cedarus Nuncius, published in 1610, alongside Sarah Langworthy's Sidereal, published just last year in 2019. The Galileo is one of the most famous books in the history of science because it is the first book to show the phases and the landscape of the moon. Although Sarah Langworthy's Sidereal is not based on Galileo, it handles a related theme, an important one for an academic institution, the search for answers about the heavens, the distance of the stars, and how we see ourselves in relation. Langworthy's books frequently reimagine historical texts, pared down to find the poetry within. This book also has won the MCBA award just last year. Here you see Shakespeare's Hamlet in the 1632 second folio edition, which Wellesley is lucky to have, paired with Patricia Meinert's Ophelia, published in 2012. Meinert's books are often quite minimal, perhaps none more so than this one, Ophelia. It is essentially a feminist reading of Hamlet. The only text you see is when Ophelia speaks in the play, giving her the leading role. The artist used pinpricks and razor cuts to convey the character's physical pain. Another area that I consider quite important to collecting is curricular support, or books that give new form to contemporary and historical events, what I consider an archive of the future almost. So here is Joseph Glanville's, on the left, Sadducismus Triumphatus, a full and plain evidence concerning witches and apparitions. This is the second edition, published in 1700, and it was important for Cotton Mather in his justification for the Salem witch trials. It is used in a class, a philosophy class, along with Maureen Cummins' Salem Lessons, published in 2010, with text by Nicole Cooley. You can see the students in the class here on the left are engaging with the book while it's spread out on our seminar room table. I find that students are eager for tactile, interrogative forms of publishing that challenge them to respond in an active way. Unlike textbooks, these books do not serve them information. They have to uncover it. And here is Romano Henni's Es ist bitter, die Heimat zu verlassen. It is bitter to leave your home, published in 2017. The text is in German, Japanese, and English. It is the story of a family who has to leave their home after the Fukushima nuclear disaster. It is told in typographic symbols, printed entirely and amazingly on paper towels. In the first class that saw this, students had surprising insights into the implicit meaning of paper towels used as a support for the theme of disposable lives and the fragility of those lives. And here is Shirley Ann Whitaker's Ashes to Ashes, commemorating thousands of lynchings in the US. On the right, you can see the names of the victims enlarged so that you can read it more carefully. But all of these names cover the entire background of the etching that she made of that tree. Whitaker made this broadside and the accompanying book as a eulogy for the unburied. It is very powerful. An area that I wasn't aware I was actually collecting until there became a kind of critical mass is the use of hybrid technologies to produce innovative work. And in this category, none better than Invisible Cities, published by Edition Reese in 2012. This is a collaboration between Harry and Sandra Reese and Jean-Pierre Hébert, based on and structured by Invisible Cities of Italo Calvino. It is accompanied by expansive images on each page spread that resemble dynamic galactic tides. This collaboration between three artists uses techniques that include inkjet, letterpress, mesostic typography in a nod to John Gage, and computational drawings generated through code based on word occurrences in the text. Truly, it is the Janus of artist books, beautifully melding past, present, and future technologies. And this is Rick Myers, An Excavation, a reading. The text is 4 English translations of a poem by Constantine Cavafy, Before the Statue of Endymion. Excavation is a video and sound work. There is no book. It is all contained in the flash drive you see here. Myers uses laser-cut acrylic sheets and marble powder residue to produce what I call a digital palimpsest, relying on the reader's voice to disturb the thin membrane under the stencil. As he reads aloud, each new translation of the poem appears through the destruction of the one previously read. It's hard to get your head around this. And another area that I'm seeing much more of these days is books that harness and present data in a visually compelling and innovative way. We are surrounded by data, and I'm beginning to see that reflected in artist books as well. So here, for instance, is Ulrich Wagner's Winkelbuch project. And on the right, you see a classroom presentation of Wellesley's copy, which is the yellow triangle, or gelber Winkel. It is triangular in shape and fits into a slipcase, as you can see here. And it folds out into a series of hexagons, representing the floor plans of concentration camps. The symbol of the triangle represents the identity badges of each undesirable group of camp inmates. Students commented that the difficulty of refolding it to get it back into the box was appropriate for the enormity of the crime committed. And I have to say that I took a risk when I purchased this because I really wasn't sure if it would be appropriate for teaching or if it would be too difficult to penetrate. And Wellesley students never let me down. This is an ongoing public project, Eileen Boxer's Report US. It's about the violence brought upon society by the nearly unrestricted availability of firearms in this country. Very much like Shirley Whitaker's Ashes to Ashes, it's the sheer volume of the names that helps to convey that victims of gun violence are more than just numbers, they're individuals. The boxed set edition, called The Dailies, takes published data on gun violence in the US and reports it one incident at a time, one to a page. Think about it. This box is only for the month of March 2015, and it weighs about 20 pounds. And here's Dan Mellis's A History of Light. A History of Light uses GPS and US Census data to explore the relationship between memory, photography, and historical documents. Mellis visually layers the location and names and ages of past occupants, many of them immigrants, onto the negative space of the Dan Ryan Expressway in a neighborhood of Chicago. So what you're looking at there at the upper top of the book is the names of residents and their ages and their occupations who are now long dead, whose buildings are long gone, replaced by this contemporary expressway. It's pretty haunting. And a category that goes without saying, in my mind, is unity of material and content, books that provide us with resonance, sustenance, and persistence in the memory. Perhaps none better than Carolee Campbell's The Persephones, published in 2009, to poetry of Nathaniel Tarn. In harmony with the narrative of Persephone in Greek mythology, Campbell used salt and sumi ink to create the atmosphere of the dark underworld. Each copy is enclosed in a full goatskin wrapper, imbuing the entire work with echoes of sacrifice and the cycle of renewed life. It is a perfect union. This is Veronica Schaefer's Dinaza, published in 2009. It is a text by Ryunosuke Akutagawa, in which Akutagawa describes his short story of a vain and selfish Zen priest from the Heian era who agonizes about his extremely long nose. Concentrating on the theme of vanity, the text is rather humorously illustrated with enlarged prints of skin structures and inked hairballs. The case, which you see on the right here, is made of semi-transparent PVC jelly film, silicone cords, and tiny magnets which resemble hair follicles. The whole book is exquisitely repellent. I believe the curator's job is not just to acquire, but to educate and enlighten, because there will always be new audiences for these books. At Wellesley College, there's a new audience every year. So I'll end with a slide of selected lectures that I've developed for individual courses here at Wellesley. These are some of the most successful classes with artist books in recent years. I'd be happy to share details about any of them if anyone is interested, and I will make sure that my email address is put in the chat. So feel free to contact me personally if there's something else you'd like to know. So thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate the chance to have this opportunity to talk to you all, and I look forward to our discussion.
Hi, I'm Jill Gage, custodian of the John M. Wing Foundation on the History of Printing and bibliographer for British literature and history at the Newberry Library in Chicago. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I have collected artist books in my tenure as Wing curator. So the Wing collection at the Newberry is entering its second century, and I am the fifth curator. So our first curator, Pierce Butler, was particularly interested in collecting incunables, and he was not really interested in collecting artist books. They did not exist at the time, and that would not have been his specialty. But he did collect incunables, a lot of them, and amongst what he collected is the Hypnerotomachia polyphily from 1499, which a lot of people, myself included, would argue is the first artist book, in that the text and the image are inseparable from one another. Now, despite his love for incunables, Butler also acquired the entire run of the Kelmscott Press. So he was interested in collecting antiquarian books, but also in what he saw as notable and important contemporary books as well. And this is something that has really guided the Wing collection and me personally in thinking about collecting contemporary material. The Wing collection is a survey or a broad overview of the history of printing. And we try to collect that way for antiquarian material and contemporary material. So I certainly want to have high points, or what I see as high points of contemporary artist books. So one example would be Russell Moret, who is a very important New York printer. I really love his work. We certainly have some of it because I want people 10, 20, 50 years from now to be able to look back at the Wing collection and see these high points of American fine press and book arts printing. So Russell's work also gives me an opportunity to talk about what I look for when I look at any artist's book, or when I think about an acquisition. It has to be beautifully printed. I want to know that the person knows how to print. It has to be something that I love looking at, that's something that just really compels me to look at it, or that makes me want to go back, that makes me go home and think about it long after I've stopped looking at it. I also like things that are deeply historically rooted. I like books in which I know that the book artist understands the history of printing and understands sort of the trajectory of printing and where they fall on that. And sometimes those people can really diverge from the traditional history of printing or traditional processes of printing, and sometimes they're more part of it. And I don't care which that is, but I like people who understand the history of printing, which Russell does. I also, when I look at something, I have to be able to say, how am I going to use that at the library? Do I want to try to put it in an exhibition? Will I show it to classes? Will I show it to other book artists? Will I show it to my colleagues for things that they're interested or they're working on? I don't buy anything antiquarian or contemporary that I want to sit on a shelf. So that's something that I actually ask whenever I buy a book or acquire a book. But I think it's especially important for contemporary book arts because it's often hard. Those are the things that often don't get used as much in the collection, or they're not as easily findable or accessible to people. So that's something that I think about a lot. So one of the things that I really want to focus on is Chicago and Midwestern printing and book artists. And I have done that in part with the help of the Caxton Club and the club's interest in Chicago printing and book artists. And one case in point is Daniel Nellis, who is a former Caxton Club grant winner. And this book I did not buy. I will say this was a gift from my predecessor, Paul Gale, and his partner, Ron Carlson, who have an amazing collection of artist books. And this I really love. Daniel, it's a book called Nothing Beside Remains, and Daniel found or took standing type and he blind printed it, but he inked his fingers and held onto the paper as it went through the press. I think it's really witty, it's poignant, it's great printing, it's fun to look at. I really enjoy it. I show it to a lot of people. I don't know if everyone likes it as much as I do, but I love it. And it's something that I'm glad to have in the collection. And yeah, I show it a lot. Another book artist whose work I show all the time and I'm really, really excited about is Jennifer Farrell from Star Shaped Press. And I'm super excited about Jen because she actually had a fellowship at the Newbery to research this book, which is her latest book, The City Is My Religion. Jen works exclusively with metal type and ornaments. And what she does is she researches their use, mostly in type specimens of the period, but also in how did printers in the 19th and 20th century use these ornaments? And then she turns them into these beautiful vignettes, and it's all in very forward thinking, but so rooted in Chicago history and type history. And she's so knowledgeable about them. She's really fun. Her work is great to look at. People respond really well to it. And she is somebody I want to collect a lot of, unlike maybe other book artists who want a piece here or there. I think Jen is an important Chicago voice, and she's just an important voice in printing right now. So I'm really excited to have her work and think about her in terms of activism and her role in Chicago printing. Another Caxton Club grant winner whose work I have in the collection really love is Hannah Batzell, and this piece, Man Eater, is actually based on Hannah's own collection and own interest in these really dark, Victorian colonialist books, and she's interested in both the content and what the books looked like. These are great fun. I also will say here that I love books that engage the reader in some way. I like books that encourage the reader to pick them up and flip through them and try to figure them out and read them in different ways. I like books where people will ask me, how do I read this? What's the right way to read this? I think these this particular book or this particular work, which is actually a set of books that she made, I love showing them to English literature students and talking about how the form of a book affects how we read it or how we think about it, and how do you read a book? I think that's a question I ask students a lot, and her work is really wonderful in terms of this. She's a great favorite, again, with people at the Newberry. And I like this kind of work. I have some of Julie Chen's work, and I think that falls along similar lines. But again, as a Chicago book artist, I think Hannah is just wonderful. And I'll end by talking about a piece that my colleagues really, really love. This is the work of Jose Rezendiz, another Caxton Club grant winner. And the work is Harrison High School Walkout of 1968, which is a created archive of materials about student protests in the late 1960s. And what I like about this book is it asks the question, what is an archive? Who creates an archive? Who collects work? And then who tells those stories? How do we find out stories about the past through an archive? And who creates those materials? So this is something that I show to book art students. It's something I show to library students. My colleagues who do Chicago history really enjoy this. Of all the books I've shown tonight, this is probably the one that gets used the most at the library. And it also, I wanted to end with this book because it also represents something that I'm trying to do and my other colleagues are trying to do at the Newberry too, which is to think about diversifying the collection. And we have a fantastic collection of Chicago printing over the last 150 years. I think that I personally can do a better job of thinking about Chicago's diverse communities and diverse book artists and reaching out to those communities and encouraging work and acquiring work that represents different voices in Chicago's diverse neighborhoods and amongst Chicago's diverse art scene. So I will end there. This has been a little taste of what I have collected and some of my favorites that I've collected and why they're my favorites. And I look forward to chatting with my other co-panelists about what they've collected and their ideas about collecting artist books for the 21st century. So thank you.
Panelists, I'm wondering whether the current anti-racism movement is impacting your thoughts about collection development and what you're doing, what you could do in that regard, and how such material might be used in your respective collections.
Well, sure. I will just go ahead. Yeah, I think everybody is at the Newberry and elsewhere is interested in anti-racism, diversifying voices in Chicago or in Evanston. Ben Blunt has done amazing work that I've collected. Part of it is just, one of the questions that a couple people had is, how do artists connect with institutions? And I think that is something that's a challenge, and I'd be curious to hear about Ruth and Anne and how they handle it. Sometimes I don't know people until they come to me, or it's kind of hard to ferret out different voices in the community and things like Codex and other book fairs. Yeah, I don't really know what my answer is to this, but I am looking to do that. I think it's quite hard, and the current situation has just made it hard to see artist books. Normally people come in, or I go to a book fair and I look at the book in person, and that works for antiquarian material, but it doesn't work for artist books. I think that it's really hard. You have to see it in person. You have to be able to handle it. But I'm curious I will just ask Anne and Ruth how they feel about this.
Yeah, I'll jump in. We have a small but mighty collection, and really do try to collect in all sorts of diverse ways in terms of media, as I mentioned, and artists and the stories that they portray. We have a tiny budget, which really impacts what we can collect. And as Jill mentioned, right now, there is so much being produced out there, but none of it can come into the collection at this moment. So I have my eyes open. I would say also the American Art Museum, which is the museum I support, does have one of the largest collections of African American artwork in the country, and we've always collected widely to reflect similar aims of what they're working with in the libraries.
And I guess I'll jump in last here to say that works that have to do with current political movements have always been important, not just now, but in the past as well. Previous curators have collected widely, collecting voices of many populations and artists. I try whenever possible to be sure that there is a way to integrate these books into the curriculum, and teaching with artist books is the best way to get them in front of students. So, for instance, I just did a class on social justice movements, and another class I did was on the artist book as memorial. Those are pretty powerful books. None of them are very uplifting, but they're all documents of a time and documents of a people. And students have such diverse and really deep reactions to these. I find the best way to get them really to investigate, not just to look at them, but to close read them, is to be sure there's an assignment attached. So they must write an essay, even a one-page essay, about why they chose this book and what it means to them. And the beauty of living artists is that many of them have gotten in touch with artists, and that's because I know these artists. I make sure that it's okay with them if students contact them. Some of you here tonight, I'm pretty sure, have been contacted by Wellesley students. So it's a movement, it's a moment for the present, and it's always going to be that way.
Although I have to say that when I was at Smith College as a curator, I didn't feel that my predecessor, who was a very distinguished and renowned curator, that's Ruth Mortimer, that she had much of an interest in what was going on at that time that she was collecting. She was very interested in documenting the past and built wonderful collections of that material. But I think things have changed, and I think that there is a certain activism on the part of curators. I know from my associations with archivists that there's a very strong streak of activism in the archival profession currently. And so I think it's a new thing, and it would be good to encourage artists to bring their skills to bear and their insights to bear on material that's of current interest. Future curators will thank us for that, I'm sure. So there's lots of interesting questions so far. I would like, before we run out of time, which I hope we won't do for a little bit, but we are over an hour. Hannah asked about contacting you all or other curators too, and she actually used the word nuisance, and she was reluctant to be a nuisance to you, to us. So I'd like you to address that and to assure Hannah and others that we live for those interactions with students.
You mean artists? Students too, but
students
artists.
Students and artists. Yes, I meant artists. Right.
For my piece, I love to hear from artists and work with them. And have them show me their work, because there's always more of a story to it when they're flipping their own pages than the little blurb you can find on the Vamp and Tramp website, for example. As far as the nuisance part, I mean, send an email with some pictures or a link. I may not get to, well, I purchase in very strange cycles. At the Smithsonian, we have a budget year that follows the federal fiscal year, and money comes in plunks across the year. So I may not have the funds to actually purchase when somebody's around showing me their work. However, I keep a desiderata list, much like my colleagues, I'm sure, and any librarian or curator, of things that I've seen and I'm interested in, I could come back to later. So there's no harm in contacting and sharing your work. Just no expectation either.
I would agree with you entirely that there's no way we can see everything, and if people get in touch, that's a great way to see what's out there. I would say that because there's so much being produced, and I do have high standards for production and for usability and for repetitive viewing, that is always getting something out of it. I have put Wellesley's collecting policy on the website for special collections, and I found that that really helps artists to read that first, and I usually direct them there if they haven't found it. So having a collecting policy, especially what you do and do not collect. For instance, I know in the chat someone asked what I don't collect. I cannot collect books that require gallery space, three-dimensional works that are primarily sculptural and not editioned. It has to fit on a shelf. I have basically two rules. It has to fit on a shelf, and I have to read it. I have to want to read it more than once. That sounds simple, but it's not so simple. And I encourage artists to get in touch. That said, I do have to see some preliminary images. I definitely like being able to look at a website, and I can usually tell from the text and the images whether it's something that might fit, and then we can make an appointment. But there has to be that dance that goes on ahead of time.
I also, you can send me an email. That's how people do get in touch with me. I don't have a collection policy online. I think that's a great idea, and I think it's really useful. I have a similar collecting policy to Ruth, or at least in some part. I don't like books that are sculptural, that our conservation is going to have to build a special case for. Although I do have a book that's bound in sandpaper because he wanted it to ruin the books next to it on the shelf. Because I'm a history of printing collection, I don't buy things that are not an edition, and it generally can't be an edition of 2. It needs to be an edition of at least 5. So those are the things that right away I would say no. Also, I do. It's an ongoing relationship. It's an ongoing conversation. I have a relatively small budget, and my budget has to cover books to calligraphic manuals to whatever else I want to buy for the year. And everybody has a limited budget. I'm not the only, we all work with that. So I could really love your work and not be able to buy it this year or next year, but I will remember you and come back eventually. So it's useful. I also actually like people who come in and use the library. I will say that. And understand maybe a little bit about the Newberry. That's not necessary. There are plenty of people whose books I have who've never been to the Newberry. But yeah, so I welcome emails or any kind of conversation about your work.
Just to follow up, you all, are you doing any interactions with book artists and or purchases during the period of the pandemic? Can you do business?
Yes, I am. Among the books that I just showed you tonight, Eileen Boxer's US report was something that I purchased thanks to a review I read in the Codex Papers, Volume 2. That's another way that I find books that I want to see is by reading reviews, in parentheses, Codex Papers. And shout out to Peter Koch, who is in the audience. Thank goodness for Codex. I realize we're not holding that right now, but that is by far one of the best ways to see artist books. If artists write to me, I am perfectly happy to, if it's something I want, I can accept it. I can let it sit in the mailroom, or I can bring it into special collections and let it sit. I'm not too worried about that. In fact, I was going to say, in terms of social justice, there's so much being done right now about the Black Lives Matter movement and about politics. Ken Botnick is making a one-of-a-kind, not exactly one-of-a-kind, but a variable edition book that's based on an altered encyclopedia. And it started out as a history of St. Louis, and he's turned it into the white man's history of St. Louis. And it's every single page is about what's happening in the world right now in 2020. So I think more work is going to come out of this time period, and we are creating an archive of the future. I'm eager to see what else there will be, so get in touch.
I don't know if you saw Nina Schneider's question, which is very interesting. You three have active collections. You describe people coming in to use your material. Do they come in because they know what you have, or they're seeking something, or because of your efforts at proselytizing what you have? How much of the use is generated by you, the curators?
All of it for artist books, I would say. I would say almost nobody walks in off the street and says, I want to look at artist books. Sometimes they'll have a specific, sometimes it'll be a student and they'll say, I want to look at Claire Van Vliet or, you know, Ken Botnick or something like that. It tends to be people who are well-known and pretty established. And Mark Dimunation talked about this in New York, how looking at artist books, people kind of want this museum experience. They like to gather in a group and look at them, but it's hard to get them to look at them together. So almost all the artist books at the Newberry come out for classes or for people who have come in and said, we want an artist book experience, kind of. And I think that's one of the struggles of collecting artist books and getting people to use them. They love to look at them, but it's hard to get them to look at them on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would agree with that. In fact, I sometimes feel like most of what I do is pulling things out of my head at all times. You know, I can use the catalog to remind myself of the title or the artist, but honestly, it's just a deep, dark archive in my head. And people will ask me, well, what do you have on memory, or what do you have on, what artist books do you have that are based on the history of X? And I do have to mostly get this conversation started by thinking about what I've purchased, what's in the collection. The catalog only goes so far. It's getting better because at least artists who have websites, usually the website is linked in the catalog record, and that's a big help. But you're right, people don't do research ahead of time and say, I want to see this or that book. They usually come to me and say, what do you have that is about X? So that's an area that I don't have a good answer for.
To take that a step further, what about books in that are in languages other than English? Are those a hard sell for you? I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult for us to understand how big the world of artist books is by looking at some of our collections, which are just composed of books in English. But I know, Ruth, you do a lot of, well, I think all three of you do a lot of interactions with non-American book artists. Is that correct? Do you want to speak more about that?
I would say that the language doesn't matter. I collect specifically for the American Art and National Portrait Gallery library branch. So my story is American, but the language that the material is published in doesn't matter. We have so many conceptual works that have no words. So language there is just not even a factor. But our Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian National Design Museum up in New York has a great collection of artist books, and they collect an international. The same with the African Art Library and the Hirshhorn. So when you think of the Smithsonian on the whole, language doesn't really play a part in whether we accept a book or not.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree that, to me, the world of books and the world of art is a universal language. And if the material and the form and the concept are unified and the language is something I can't read, or students might not be able to read, even if I can read it, I'll go out of my way to find translations of the text if necessary. It's easy enough to find poetry in translation, and you can even make a copy of it and put it in with the book. I've done that for Didier Muttel's books. I've done it for some of the German books where students don't read the language. If you at least understand the text and what it means, you can get a better grasp of the material and why the artist chose to make it look the way it does. And we are not just collecting for ourselves or for the present. We have to be collecting for the future. And the world is getting smaller, and we need to represent as much as possible any language.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're getting ready to wrap up, and the questions are slowing down a bit, but I would like the three of you to answer the question, do you say to yourselves when you are confronted with a potential or possible purchase, how will I justify this purchase? And what are some of the factors for you all that go into the justification of a given purchase? And I say this mainly for the benefit of younger book artists out there who may be wondering how it is they get on your radar and how it is that you might entertain acquiring their objects. So how do you justify this purchase? Is it a tough one or is it a dumb one?
You want me to start?
Yes.
I'm very fortunate that at Wellesley I have complete control over the budget that I have, and I don't have to get other people's input if I know that it's going to be something I can use in teaching. That's my primary justification. It does have to be something I can connect to the curriculum and use in teaching. But if it's something that, if it costs a lot of money, I sometimes hesitate. I sometimes feel like, that makes it even more stress about purchasing it. But I never let money or the cost of something be the primary issue. It has to be something I know will continue to be used. And then I can spread out the purchase sometimes over a couple of years if necessary. I hate to do that because artists don't have big margins, but I usually can manage. Sometimes I can find a donor. I don't really ever feel like I have to justify it anymore because I feel like I know what I'm doing. On the other hand, I've made mistakes. And I think if you talk to any curator, honestly, they will say, yeah, there are books I wish I hadn't bought because now I know more. But you have to learn. It's like any other career. I do think justification is hard. If you have to have a committee to run things by, you're all going to have different tastes and different viewpoints. So I can only say that I feel very fortunate that the power tends to be in my hands.
So I will jump in and I will say that for some things, for more expensive purchases, I do have to run it by our acquisitions committee. And I actually kind of like that. They don't come out and say, we don't like this, but I think it's good for me to have to articulate what I like about a book and how I think it will be used and how it fits in with the Newberry's collections. And that's for any book. It's for antiquarian or artist books. So for me as a younger curator, I think that's an especially useful exercise for me to just have to say. But for things that are less expensive that don't go to the committee, as I said in the video, I don't want to buy things that sit on the shelf that that either because I bought it because I think it's important, but I don't like it, or I'm not sure about it. So if I really like something and feel like I will use it or one of my colleagues will use it, that's my justification. Or that's like sort of my baseline justification. And there are certainly other things that's kind of what I go on.
Anne, anything?
It's similar to Ruth. I have some autonomy in what I choose, but similar to Jill, if it's an expensive purchase, it has to go through the channels, and I have to do a justification. And I'm sorry, I have a little friend here.
Oh, hey.
It is past bedtime though, so because in DC it is almost 9 o'clock. Go to bed, friend.
This is a
But
Zoom moment.
yes. So I'll cut it off there so that I'm no longer on the screen and he can't see himself.
Well, thank you all. We just had a few more questions come in. I think it's about time for us to wrap up, though. But Allison asks about cataloging artists' books, and Allison, that is a really interesting question. And I would suggest to our president, Jackie, that maybe a future event like this would be about cataloging artists' books. And I will also say that Sonia Yako, who is the head of special collections at Rutgers, is having a webinar about cataloging artist books in the first or second week of December that you could get more on. She's an expert in the languages, the cataloging languages and protocols for that. So that might be very interesting. And if you want, I don't have the information on the top of my head, but you can write to me and I will give you that information. And what you say also about the loss of the experiential knowledge of the curators is true, and that is something to be lamented because, as you see from our panel tonight, these experts, these professionals, are so rich in knowledge and experience. It's a good thing that they're teaching and interacting with book artists and with researchers so that some of their legacy will live on. But it's true, there's no way to formally document that work. Okay, I think we'll end it there.